I'd like to introduce our guest today. This is someone whom I've known almost from the time he first arrived here in the Phoenix area. And he's been a terrific business partner, someone that I've enjoyed networking with, someone who we've done a couple of seminars together where we've kind of joined up services and worked with some other professionals in a larger group presentation. And JD has got many years now in the PEO industry. He's from Portland, Oregon area, graduated from the University of Portland. Spent many years in the golf and hospitality industry. Also worked as a real estate broker. Was partner in a firm in Bend, Oregon. And then in 2010, he joined BBSI as an area manager. And I believe that your experience with BBSI has all been down here in the Phoenix area. He's currently leading that office. JD has been involved with many business groups around the Phoenix area, including Trusted Advisor Network. That's another group here in town that if anyone's interested, be happy to talk more about that, or TAN group as we call it. Rotary Club. JD's been involved with Arizona Business Leadership, which is a good group as well. Chambers of Commerce, both in Phoenix and Scottsdale, and the Arizona Subcontractors Association. And you do some volunteering as well as still playing golf and travel. So with all that, JD, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mark. Can everyone hear me all right? See our screen? One person, Mark, I know you can. I just want to make sure before I get going.
I hear you fine.
Well, great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, everyone. And Mark, thank you for the invitation and for the nice introduction. That'll save me having to talk about myself. But I have been working with small business owners in either their commercial real estate or their human capital for about the last 20 years, nearly 20 years. And this is my third office with BBSI. I started in their Bend, Oregon office. I opened an office in the Bay Area and then came here about 8 years ago. And Mark was one of the first persons I met, and I appreciate that. And my goal here today is to give an overview of what is a PEO and why they make sense. It's impossible to cover every single aspect of that. I'm happy to follow up with anyone afterward if you have any questions. I understand this PowerPoint will be sent out later. And I think if you have questions, you're going to put them in the chat. And Mark, you'll interrupt me if needed to clarify something so we don't go down a tangent.
Yes, absolutely. I'm trying to keep an eye on that as you're talking. So, yep.
Okay. And we do have time at the end for questions. So again, I'm not going to do a commercial for BBSI. BBSI is Barrett Business Services Incorporated. We are a PEO. I'll close with a little bit of information about us, but I'm going to come at this as if I was a potential client for a PEO and some of the questions I would ask and some of the services I would expect. So let's dive in. So today we're going to cover what is a PEO. I heard, I think it was Tony said he had never heard of one. I had never heard of a PEO before I came to work for BBSI. So a lot of people don't know that term and certainly not that acronym. I'll give a brief industry overview, some statistics, why a small business would use a PEO, and some things to keep in mind if you choose to choose one. So as far as an introduction to the industry, a PEO is basically I heard several of you are fractional CFOs, CPAs. Essentially, a PEO is a co-employment agreement with a business owner to provide fractional access to HR professionals, risk and safety professionals, and payroll people. So it's cost effective to partner with the PEO. Additionally, there can be savings with health insurance for your employees and sometimes workers' compensation. So every scenario is different. Every state has its different laws. You really have to look at all the moving parts to really know if it makes sense for a business owner. But here are some of the key points: payroll, as I mentioned, HR, health plans, risk and safety management, and also helping with employee recruiting, training, development. So by definition, a PEO is a co-employer with the client for their workforce. It's not employee leasing. It's not joint employment. It's a co-employer relationship. There's a client service agreement that lays out very specifically, at least with all the major PEOs. And by the way, there's about 700 PEOs operating in the country right now. But the client service agreement really lays out each responsibilities and expectations of each party. The work site employer, we call them, or the PEO, which serves as the employer record, if you will, because the payroll is reported under the PEO's EIN. As far as an industry, there's so somebody mentioned that they've heard America runs on Dunkin' Donuts, but we really believe America runs on small business. There's over a million businesses in the U.S. that have between 10 and 100 employees, and the industry is growing at a rate of about 10 to 15% a year, with approximately 100,000 worksite employees and 6,000 new clients industry-wide. So it is getting some traction as business gets more and more complicated to run, and especially in some certain states like California. PEOs can provide a lot of value to a business owner who isn't necessarily a sophisticated business operator. Businesses and PEO relationships are twice as likely to succeed. They grow at about 7 to 9% more than average, and they have an important one, 10 to 14% less turnover. So that, as you all know, reduce a lot of costs with that. Some other companies or some companies in that world that you may have heard of, ADP Total Source is the biggest. Paychex owns Oasis Outsourcing as their PEO. Insperity is a major player out of the Houston area nationally, as is TriNet out of the Bay Area. And we're actually the 6th largest PEO based in the Portland, Oregon area. And these are publicly traded PEOs. To the right here, we have some privately held, and they tend to be more technology-driven endeavors. So just to give you some brand names to be familiar with. And here in the Phoenix market, here's some local PEOs that we run into periodically. I didn't realize we'd have so many people from out of the area, so these names might not mean much to you, but there are some privately held local PEOs too. So I bet everyone here knows someone that owns and operates a small business, and you realize all the plates, and in this case, this graphic, all the plates they have to keep spinning to keep their business afloat. Business owners can't quit. They're all in, meaning they're fully invested in most cases, and they're the last one to get paid. So as we've all heard, it's a lonely job, and it seems like every time they get a phone call, somebody wants something. And a PEO is here to help, in the areas, particularly people at the top and culture and maybe some of their process and systems to help with human capital, so the business owner can focus on growing the business as opposed to being an administrator of the business. I don't know anybody that got into, but got into business to run payroll and do HR documents. A typical client that we interact with is someone in the trades that decided they had an entrepreneurial spirit and they wanted to start their own business. They don't necessarily have a business management background, so they don't know what they don't know, and partnering with a PEO can help alleviate that. These are some of the areas that PEOs will focus on. As I mentioned a few of these already, but HR consulting and compliance, the state and federal HR and employment law changes all the time. It's tough to stay on top of it. And risk and safety consulting, not only just OSHA and state agencies, but also help with the NCCI, your experience mod, and helping keep your work comp rates down. They should be able to help you with your workplace culture and your organizational development. Some even get into strategic planning and succession planning. As we know, I run into a lot of business owners and I ask them what their exit strategy is. And I will say not more than 1 in 10 have a vision for their exit. Benefits I mentioned, payroll, timekeeping systems, workers' comp, and claims management. Those are all distractions from business. And in a PEO for a small business owner, again, that doesn't have a lot of experience in business administration or management, can have all this under one roof. So they're basically outsourcing their whole HR department and HR payroll and workers' comp department. Working with a PEO, here's some more of the benefits, a little bit of what I just said. The biggest one is allowing the business owner to focus on running business, less time on transactional HR, the paperwork and such. And a big motivator for people to come to PEOs is the fifth one down, provide large employer buying power for small businesses, which really is directly into the health insurance plan. Plans are more attractive for small business. And then workers' comp, they're typically pay as you go with no deposits or audits because the PEO is doing the payroll and providing the work comp. And again, helping with compliance and legal matters, and just being more efficient to have everything under one roof as opposed to, I mean, you're going to outsource of all these things I just mentioned. If you had to go elsewhere for each one of them, you're going to have 5 or 6 different vendors to work with or relationships to deal with. And if you have a PEO, it'll all be under one roof. So we tend to see which business owners need PEO, very much the ones that are experiencing rapid growth. For example, we just had a business owner in our office that does maintenance on airplanes, and he's based at airports. And he came to us 3 years ago with one location in Phoenix and 3 employees. And I just asked for an update. He's in 6 states now and has 26 employees. Well, setting up all those employees in all those states would have been a major time hassle for him, and he wouldn't have the expertise, so he would probably have to pay somebody to help him. And for a PEO, that's something you would do as part of helping the business owner grow. So businesses that are experiencing growth, or conversely, they've hit a plateau, a stall, if you will, we help them talk through what's going on. Is it people driven or process or system? What's going on with your business to cause the stall? If they have teams or key people that need further development and basically want to focus on the core business, our goal is to make them the relever. That's an internal term we use. But again, I'm speaking, I guess, from my experience, but all PEOs should do this, is to help get you in a situation where you can grow your own business. It's scalable. With a PEO, you're typically, again, there's a lot of companies do it different ways. Typically, they will bundle your payroll taxes, the fees, and the workers' comp into one rate. So it makes it very predictable for your payroll burden for the contract period. And that makes it a lot easier for cash flow for small businesses. And our goal is to help them be more profitable. This is something we do with clients also, and I would think if you're looking at PEOs or you want to know more about them, this is just a model where we show a business develops an idea, has rapid growth at first, and then starts to plateau, and they need to look to relever or reset. And that could be something like getting new manufacturing equipment or new software, or maybe some new people, maybe a new general manager. And all that change, it can be tough. And so there's a little bit of a reset. You can see the model shows going backwards a little bit, but then that takes you to higher levels. We see that a lot with the small business owners that will have some staff that help get them to where they're at, but don't have the skill set to take them to the next level. And so that's a tough conversation for some of the small business owners, and we help them. The PEOs can help them do that. Another question, and this is important, is especially if you're working with your clients looking at PEOs, where are they now and where do they want to go? What's their business going to look like at 2 times the size or 3 times the size? And that's a hard question for a lot of small business owners. we'll talk to them and they'll tell us that they're already working, 24/7, which I know they're not, but they're probably working 6 10s, and they want the business 2 or 3 times as big. Well, how are they going to do it? Well, then they need to build a team behind them, and a PEO will help business owners build that bench behind them so they can take it to where they're trying to take their business. Some of the factors to think about, this isn't inclusive, this is just some things I came up with for today. What are some of the criteria to ask about a PEO? Well, first, you really have to, at the very top there, what are the goals and what do they want their business to go? And you have to establish that, because then you'll know which services PEOs offer are most important. There are some PEOs that are very hands-off and technology driven, and there's some that are very high touch, and they get a team of people to work closely with them. So some questions to ask. I don't want to read these all to you, but we could go through them quickly. Do they provide a dedicated team or at least an account manager? We run into PEOs that don't have anybody that's quote in charge on the client, on the PEO side, and the client kind of is lost. They call 800 numbers and they get routed around, and there's no really one bottom line accountable person. Similar to that, number 2, the support options. Are they delivering services through call centers, or is there a direct team with people that know the client? Service team, yeah, is the service team credentialed and experienced, and do they have a lot of turnover at the PEO? I'd be very cautious of a PEO that has a lot of turnover. Is the PEO certified? ESAC is much like the FDIC for PEOs, and only about 10% of the PEOs have ESAC certification, where they've got tangible evidence that they follow responsibilities for the industry, everything from taxes and benefits, insurance premiums, they're getting paid, and that's important. Is the PEO public or private? Public PEOs, their books are audited and published, and you can see how they're doing financially. But if you have putting someone in a private PEO, you need to be confident they have financial wherewithal, because they're paying the employer taxes on behalf of the client, and you need to know that those are getting done. If you got employees in multi-states or international, can that PEO support that? That once it goes international, it really limits the playing field. I think probably just ADP and Paychecks and Insperity can do international stuff. And what kind of benefits do they offer, and who's the carrier? Make sure it's a good carrier and those are good plans. Pricing, it can be confusing. As I mentioned, it's usually a bundled rate with a percent of payroll. I've seen percent of payroll range from 1% to as high as 8%. And it's hard to be critical of that until you know what services are being offered. There's a company that charges 1%, and they're essentially a glorified payroll company that'll provide workers' comp. And if you have a question about HR, you call them. And they don't represent that they do any more than that, and they charge for that, and it's fair, but there's not a lot of help. They're never going to proactively call a client and let them know about some new legislation that's been passed in their state affecting minimum wage or some sick leave legislation. They're not going to call and be proactive, so you don't pay. So you really, it's a model of you get what you pay for. And along those lines, can you carve out some services? I mean, what if you don't want the workers' comp or you don't want benefits? Can those things be carved out? So that's an important question to ask. And as I mentioned in the client service agreement, who assumes which liabilities? And you need to be clear on that. Do they have additional services? I mean, some have 401ks, some do recruiting, more of a headhunting type recruiting. And do they charge a fee? And if so, what is that? And then I would want to know what industries are they experienced in. Do their risk managers know about transportation? Do the HR people know about how to handle people working from home, what have you? So make sure they have experience in the various industries that you're touching. I went through that pretty quick. Most of the information, the statistics were provided by the National Association of PEOs, and the website's there. It's napo.org. And there's a wealth of information there. If you are curious to know more, I would encourage you to go there. And that took about half the time I thought it would. So I'm ready for questions.
No problem, JD. No, that was a great overview. I think you triggered a lot of general topics that you could delve, I'm sure, a lot deeper into, and maybe we'll take a little more time if everyone wants to. I do have a question here from the group that came through on the chat. Mike was asking, how do you determine the experience rate for state unemployment through a PEO?
So every state has different legislation about that. In the states I'm familiar with that we work in, Arizona, for example, where it's legislated that we use our state unemployment rate for all PEO clients. But in most of the states, including California, you will use the client's SUTA rate, and the PEO would get a power of attorney signed to pay the taxes on behalf of the client, but the client's SUTA is used in most states. Some states have high caps on their SUTA, some have low caps. It's just every state, the impact of that, of what I was saying, just depends on which state it is, what they need to price it. So it just depends, I guess, is the answer.
Sure. Mike, did that answer your question?
Yes, excuse me, it does, and I think I'm here in Utah here, and I don't think the PEOs here in Utah are required to set up and establish each company's experience rate, and I think it gets gap filled. And
I missed that last part. Oh.
I think for me, what I've experienced here is just the PEO is assigning a rate rather than having the company I work for using their own experience mod, if you will, with the state.
Oh, okay. Now, when you say experience mod, do you mean workers' comp X mod, or are you talking about unemployment?
I use the word experience mod, but I'm talking about the SUTA rate, if you will, the percentage rate that's, I know there is a state cap that they use as well, but there's a rate that's assigned to it here. In most places, it's based upon your experience and your own turnover and applying for state unemployment. But in
correct, yeah.
And here, I don't think in Utah that it's necessarily required that you do that. And what I'm afraid of is we're just getting charged a rate that's being picked out that's not really reflective of our own unemployment history.
Well, I hear what you're saying. It's hard to comment on that, not seeing the pricing and what you're looking at. But yeah, and I haven't personally worked in Utah. I don't know offhand how it's handled there, but typically the client's SUTA rate is used and the PEO gets a power of attorney. But I guess what I'm hearing from you is they're charging you a rate. They're charging you and they're just paying the taxes, but they can't pay your taxes without a power of attorney. And at some point you should know what your SUTA rate is. And I would just sit down and have an honest conversation with them about where's all the money going.
Right.
Okay. I'll share this. Back in the day, some PEOs. I mean, just like every business, whether it's insurance or anything, if there's good operators and there's not so good operators, and there were some PEOs. I've heard stories of a PEO that I don't think is still in business here anymore. Back in the 90s, would have rates that factored in the full SUTA rates, and then after the employees hit their caps, they didn't stop charging it, and they collected excess. Wow. They represented that's not what they represented, and they collected more. So it just depends. Yep.
Yeah, that's that doesn't help the industry when that kind of thing goes on, does it?
No.
Let's see, Nestor has sent in a question here. And I think he's got a two-part piece here. He said, what is the ideal size of a company to initiate a PEO? And then he adds to that, at what point do you outgrow a PEO? And what are the common issues of separation? I.e., it's easy to get married and hard to get divorced.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Typically, I mean, we have some clients with just a few employees because they don't want to deal with all the paperwork of being an employer. But typically, my answer is from 5 to 50 employees typically need help with everything we've talked about. And when they get over 50 employees and maybe 70 or certainly approaching 100 employees, they probably can afford to bring HR in-house and do it themselves. Once they have more than 50 employees, they can probably get a better health insurance options, because under 50 employees, the PEOs typically put everybody on a master plan, and that's how they bring them the better health options than they could get normally if they had less than 50 employees on their own. So once somebody's over about 50 employees, 70 employees, that said, my biggest client's got 130 employees. We still provide all the support and backup and help for them. But so that's kind of when they outgrow it. And then as far as terminating the relationship, yes, you need to align all the components. You know, what's going to happen with the health insurance, what's going to happen with the workers' comp, the tax reporting, everything we've talked about has an exit, and you just need to account for it. I wouldn't recommend anybody leaves a PEO hastily. I mean, at least take 30 days to get everything else in place. I guess that's my quick answer. But everything that's been talked about needs to be unraveled or changed over. I mean, you could have 401ks that could be rolled over. The health insurance usually is not that hard to move, but those are steps, and it can take time to do it.
Yeah, what I'm really wondering about is, and I think you've answered the question, is that at what point is it still financially feasible to engage a PEO so that you can provide a living wage to your employees for a small growing firm, before, so that it's still a reasonable cost to the company, because health insurance is one of the biggest issues now that I'm coming across when I'm talking to small business owners, and also myself as I'm interested in building a small business. That's like the number one issue is health insurance. So yeah, okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Great answer.
Oh, sure. And here's the challenge. Why don't give you just a black and white answer? Some PEOs will subsidize the health insurance to get somebody to sign up and make it make sense. And so you can't say, well, gee, they charge 4% for that's too much. Yeah, but they're saving you $10,000 on your health insurance. So you really have to look at the whole package before you evaluate any of the components.
Okay.
So if a PEO comes in and saves, because of their size, can save you, 10 or 15% on your work comp and another 20% on your benefits, well, that might be worth paying them 4% for admin fee of everything else, and they're taking care of,
yeah,
all the things involved and all that. So you really have to look at the package.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Great advice.
All right, good, thanks. Tony asks, is BBI's mix heavily leaned towards the co-employment model, or do you have temp staffing capabilities as well, where BBSI is the employer of record? And in general, what are your primary industries?
Well, BBSI, I'll take the last one first. 85% of our client base is what we'll call blue and gray collar. One of our competitive advantages is that we own our own, well, again, each state's different, but we have a great program for workers' comp. We help with risk and safety consulting, and we help with any claims management. So we excel in that world. Back to the question, as far as staffing, yes, some of our branches, it depends what market you're in. Some of our branches, most of our California branches, and I know our Idaho and Utah branches do a lot of staffing where we send employees to the clients and they stay our employee completely. I think there were 3 parts to that question. I might have only got 2 of them.
Oh, what are your primary industries?
Well, construction, subcontractors, HVAC contractors, plumbers, cement contractors, building, transportation, light manufacturing. Yeah, any blue and gray, and a little bit of gray collar. We'll have some engineers and various types of business, architects, engineers. Actually, I guess architects aren't gray collar, but our particular niche is the blue collar world. And most of those business owners aren't professional business managers. They were good at what they did and decided they wanted to open their own business, and they hired their friends and family to get started. And then they've got 10 employees, and then they've got 15, and then they got headaches and they need help.
Yeah, that's a lot of my clients fit that same mold. It's very much the pattern, and very common here in the Phoenix area for sure. So definitely can relate to all of that. Let's see here. Mike has another question. He asks, how are you handling amending 941s? You know, a lot of employers have been taking advantage of the employee retention tax credits, right? And that gets a little sticky because you've got to restate or amend the 941s from prior years. I guess we're going back probably now well into 2021 and 2020. So how are you handling that when it has to be done through a PEO EIN? And how is this handled when you have a lot of clients?
Yep, we work closely when all the PPP loans and the ERTC were all announced. We got in front of that. We actually contacted all of our clients to tell them these things were coming and to talk to their financial professionals to see if they qualified or not. And for 2 years, we amended the reports as needed. Just this year, though, there's now, and we've talked to all of our clients many times, but we finally, to basically get the stragglers in, we've announced that there is going to be a fee associated with the refilings if they don't get them done. So last quarter was the first one we actually charged a fee. It's not a profit center for us. It's an incentive to get these things done.
Yeah, that makes
yeah, we
sense.
worked very closely. That was a major, the whole COVID period and helping our clients work through all that was a major benefit we brought to a lot of our clients.
Yeah, I also have run into this now recently on a similar vein with the R&D tax credit, where that one is a little more prospective as opposed to going back in time, although I think you can on your personal tax return, at least for LLCs, but certainly it requires some challenges on how you file both payroll taxes and income taxes going forward sometimes.
Yeah, and we have a client that we did, well, a couple clients that did it, and one of them we actually fronted the tax credit to them, and we'll wait to get it back on the back end. So.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Nice. Well, that's right, because you're a little more intertwined as a PEO and being able to do that, I suppose.
Yep.
Let's see.
By the way, I put our map up here. Just I heard a few folks here from Salt Lake City. We've got 2 offices there. Reno, we have an office. We have an office in Santa Ana and another dozen or so in California, and 3 offices in Colorado. So if any of you would like to have some FaceTime with my counterparts in those markets, I'm happy to connect you, and that way you could speak to specific state-specific matters. And we're not in Florida yet, but someday.
Looks like it would make sense with the southeast corner there, where it looks like you've got some connectivity already.
Yep.
Let's see. Robert here says, for larger PEOs, do they mostly leverage offshore resources for payroll support admin duties? Also, do these larger PEOs like BBSI utilize various levels of support, i.e. gold, silver, bronze?
Well, I can't speak to the big ones, but I would say anecdotally, they do have a lot of offshore services provided out of call centers. But don't hold me to that, but that's my understanding. BBSI does not. We're different in that we deliver services at the branch level. We've got 60 offices and no call centers. So when somebody's getting a client in Tucson, Arizona is getting their payroll printed and produced, nobody's getting checks much anymore, but it's all processed in Tucson. So if there's some check that has to be fixed that day, it can be done. So we don't have call centers ourselves, so I can't speak to that. And as far as levels of service, no, we try to provide 5-star service to everyone. Again, I can't speak to the other ones. I'm not aware that they have levels of service. But we do sit down with the client, we assess their needs, we ascertain what services they're most likely going to need, and then we price it accordingly. I mean, the size of the client, the complexity, how many locations, how many states they operate in. There's a lot of factors that go into that pricing. And I've been in the company 12 years now, and my philosophy is to price it right and keep the business forever. So we don't make money if somebody comes to us for a year and leaves. For those of you that do some fractional work, a lot of that startup happens in year one. And if every client you got up and running then left, you couldn't stay in business very long. So there might be a perception that PEOs are expensive. It just depends. If you need the service, if you don't need any of the service, well, then we sure are expensive. But if you need the services, then we're the best deal you can find.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. It's although I think sometimes there is that perception out in the marketplace. Certainly, I know from some of my smaller clients, that's the perception they have.
Yeah. Well, if all the things we talked about already, all the things here, let's say you have a 25 employees with average of 40,000 in compensation, that's $1 million payroll, and you're probably going to pay 2.5%. So $25,000 a year, about $2,000 a month. So for the cost of an entry level office person, you're going to have expertise and backup and support in all of these areas. So the business owner has to decide if it makes sense or not. Our BBSI's retention runs over 90%. So we work very hard to make sure it's well aligned on the front end, because again, we don't want somebody coming to us and then leaving in a year. So our clients meet the service team that they're going to work with, where some of the larger PEOs, the clients will meet a professional salesperson, and then after the deal's signed, they'll hand them off to a service team. And we disagree with that process. We think clients should know who they're going to work with and make that decision.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other sort of quasi model I've run into with a couple of my clients has been with PEOs that rely heavily on I think you mentioned them, technology base, and there's not a lot of hand holding from what I've observed. It's all done sort of nationally in many cases, and via text messages and that sort of thing, in terms of if you need some direction with a particular problem.
Yeah, it just depends on the sophistication and the needs for the client. But yeah, with larger clients that maybe have an HR person on staff may just want to use the PEO to help with the health plan and the work comp, and they really don't care about getting HR support. And small business owners, I find one of the most frustrating, challenging things is they don't know what they don't know. So
Yeah.
we try to have at least no less than quarterly meetings with clients to talk about how things are going and try to head off issues before they get there. It's easy just to send somebody a handbook or some job descriptions and go, here you go, call me if you have a question. But we actually sit down with people and talk about how to implement these things.
No, that's fantastic. I know for my group of clients, that's really what they generally want, as long as it meets their value proposition. I think that makes a lot of sense, JD. Well, I see we've already come up to the 5 o'clock hour. I've got some folks dropping off, so we're gonna.
And last, my closing comment again, thank you for your time. And if I were to be a small business owner and use a PEO, I'd make them earn, I'd engage them a lot. I'd make them earn every dollar and utilize them and leverage the team. And it certainly makes sense at that point. The more you use them, the better it works for everybody.
Yeah, good advice. JD, we really appreciate your time today. Terrific job.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, everybody.